This strange, transparent creature is from Mars. Don't be fooled by its fragile appearance. You can't imagine how strong it is. It was found in Martian soil brought back by spacecraft. On the first day back on the space station, it was just an inactive cell, enabled through technology by biologist Hugh, and he cares for it like his own child. Hugh gave it life and took good care of it, and named it Calvin. The growth rate is amazing, and it only takes a few days to become as big as a finger. Humans know very little about these new creatures, and they can only observe and study it in test box. After a few days like this, Calvin grew to the size of a palm. Hugh accidentally discovered that it had returned to its sleeping state. So he tried to wake the creature up with an electric shock, but unexpectedly, Hugh, who didn't feel any harm, immediately put his hand into the box. At the time of being electrocuted, Calvin immediately woke up and hugged Hugh's palm tightly. The rest of the space station members observe every move in the lab, and they tell Hugh to withdraw his right hand out of harm's way. But Calvin's power is unimaginable. Hugh tried to attract its attention with electric shock sticks, but Hugh's efforts to try harder were in vain. Hugh screamed in pain. He slowly pulled his right hand, which already looked soft as if it had no bones. Then Hugh passed out. Unexpectedly, Calvin's next move was even more surprising. It seemed to have higher brain intelligence, and used a broken electroshock bar to penetrate the rubber gloves and escape. It slowly approached the laboratory at the side, cautiously approaching the lab rat and attacking it. Calvin wrapped it up in an instant, and within seconds, it was devouring the mouse. Seeing how dangerous this creature was, Rory rushed to the laboratory to save Hugh. But just as he was about to get Hugh out of the way, Calvin suddenly reacted. To prevent the unknown creature from escaping, Ekaterina immediately closed the laboratory door. Rory inside could only try to save himself. He tries to attack Calvin with a flamethrower to burn it to death. Flames gushed out, and Calvin moved flexibly. After several clever evasion attempts, not only it doesn't burn to death, but Rory's flamethrower ran out of fuel, and Calvin disappeared. As Rory was looking for it, Calvin jumped into Rory's face. Rory panicked and he tried his best to free himself, but Calvin was so strong that Rory could only see it crawling into his mouth. Then felt the pain, and fresh blood spurted out of Rory's mouth. Rory was killed. But at this moment, Flamethrower, who was floating in the air, accidentally touched the fire suppression system, and the air outlet was instantly opened. Calvin crawled out of Rory's mouth. It could feel the change in airflow, so it could judge for itself where there was an exit. So Calvin slowly approached the airway, trying to escape from the laboratory through the airway hole. To seal it, they immediately shut down all fire suppression systems, but Calvin moved faster. Calvin entered before the last channel could close. From now on, no one knew where this monstrous creature would appear. In the event of an emergency on the space station, the commander will immediately contact Earth for guidance, but the communication signal is lost. Therefore, they concluded that the antenna outside was damaged, but that the mechanic, Rory, was dead. In desperation, the commander had no choice but to get out, as she had little training. The commander finally found the problem, namely the coolant. When she checked the communications coolant outside, it was empty. Calvin is like a human. It also needs oxygen and cooling food, which Calvin must have drank. While everyone was discussing how to deal with it, Calvin suddenly jumped out, clutching the commander's spacesuit tightly. Then a large amount of coolant appeared on the spacesuit. Apparently, Calvin was already into it. The commander can only retreat in an emergency to the space station. When the commander arrives, her spacesuit is filled with coolant, and she almost suffocates. David yelled at her to turn the valve clockwise, but the commander was speechless. Instead of doing what David said, she closed the door counterclockwise. David understands that the commander doesn't want to bring Calvin back to the space station, but wants to die with it. As the coolant builds up, the commander dies and drifts through space. David couldn't do anything about it, and the clever Calvin was reabsorbed into the space station as the corpse floated away. There is no oxygen in space. As long as Calvin is blocked outside the station, sooner or later Calvin will die. Currently, the only place to enter the space station is the booster jet. So Sho stared at the booster jet's temp gauge. When Calvin got into the booster jet, he started the engine and blasted it into space. Sure enough, when there is a change in temperature, Sho reacted quickly and ignited the thruster jets. But cunning Calvin saw the hitch and ran to the thrusters one after another, and the thruster's fuel was about to run out. In order for the space station to remain in normal orbit and not crash, Show must leave the only fuel left. This method doesn't work, and they can only see Calvin entering the space station again. Now there's only one way. They decide to retreat and hide in one room, and the other room's oxygen will be emptied when Calvin enters, and Calvin will die without oxygen. Unexpectedly, not long after they finished, Hugh's injuries got worse and he passed out. The remaining three immediately saved him and finally pulled him back. But at this time, a strange sight appeared. Calvin suddenly appeared on Hugh's body. It devoured Hugh's leg, and its size was several times bigger than before. Seeing this, several people turned around and fled in panic. Show was left behind and hid in the dormant capsule. Calvin follows him, trying to get into the capsule. Just when he thinks his life is in danger, Calvin leaves because the capsule is too hard. When Show got entangled with Calvin, Miranda and David take the chance to save Hugh, but before they can save him, Hugh must die of 2 serious injuries. And they realize that Calvin had swallowed Hugh's sensor. Now its every move can be seen on the monitor. Then as long as Miranda and David kept following it, he could find a chance to eliminate it. Calvin found Hugh's body and was about to have a big meal, but it didn't expect that this was a trap set by Miranda and David, and Calvin was locked in the room. David immediately turned on the exhaust system, ready to release oxygen to kill Calvin. But at this time, Earth received a distress message. The rescue team sent by Earth also arrived at this time. They land at the station's entrance, which happens to be Calvin's room. After intense shaking, the rescue spacecraft managed to dock. But now Miranda has bad news to share. This spaceship isn't here to save, but to propel the space station into outer space. They already know what happened here, and the purpose of this trip is to eliminate all dangers on Earth at any cost. And only Miranda, who knows these orders. Show, on the other hand, thinks he was saved to leave the dormant capsule, and he goes to the room where Calvin is, but he doesn't know what happened here. Unsurprisingly, he was followed by Calvin. At this time, the rescue spacecraft started its engines, and the space station was slowly pushed into space. The massive push caused damage to the station door. Miranda and David wanted to save Show from Calvin, but they didn't expect that the huge pressure would still suck Show into space, and Show must die. Seeing that Calvin was still ahead of them, Miranda rushed back and closed the gate. Next, the space station begins to slowly disintegrate due to violent collisions. Surprisingly, it was precisely because of this collision that the space station not only did not float into outer space, but also flew towards the Earth. At this rate, Calvin will definitely be brought back to Earth. So, at this last moment, the two made a difficult decision. The space station also has 2 evacuation spacecraft. David insisted on giving up hope of life to Miranda. He let Miranda escape back to Earth in an evacuation capsule, and he would lure Calvin to the other side, then immediately rush into space. He would never bring Calvin back to Earth, not even at the cost of his life. At this time, Calvin has become very big, and he easily opened David's spacesuit. Obviously, his intelligence has developed. As the capsule again quickly shot into the atmosphere, the capsule slowly burned, until the moment the parachute opened, slowly landed in the ocean. Nearby, fishermen immediately rushed over when they saw the falling capsule. But something surprising happens, and the person in the capsule to return turns out to be David. He shouted not to open the door, but the people outside couldn't hear him at all. When the door is opened, then Calvin will definitely be free. It turns out that Miranda's evacuation capsule deviated from its orbit due to a system failure and went straight into outer space, while David's evacuation capsule was forced to change its orbit by Calvin and finally managed to land on Earth. For in the future, the Earth will most likely become a delicious meal for this strong and smart creature. The movie ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.